Good morning. So today I'm going to talk about my senior project, and my senior project was an ethnography about land. I decided to write an ethnography as a way of combining my experiences here at the college with social sciences and natural sciences, and I quickly realized that an ethnography was going to be a great way of combining those experiences. And so I decided to do that, and I went to Bolivia to look at land there and land struggles specifically. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of writing an ethnography. I began doing a literature review in the spring of last year, so about this time, in preparation for my first stage of research in Bolivia in the summer of 2014, after which I came back to the college in the fall, and then I did an independent study with Professors Heath Cabot and Professor Netta Van Vliet, looking at the ways in which indigeneity and identity were connected to the land struggles of this region, trying also to understand the role of some of the most important social movements in the country and how they've been influencing land struggles and governance in Bolivia. And finally, this spring, I wrote the ethnography. In terms of what I was actually doing there, it varied a lot depending on the time of my fieldwork. At times, I was mostly in urban areas. I was conducting interviews with NGO workers and government officials, while I also went to rural areas and also conducted interviews with leaders of indigenous organizations, and also went on fairly long walks in the forest trying to understand how forest management is working in Bolivia today, and what is the role of these indigenous organizations in changing or continuing some of these practices. So the combination of my fieldwork in Bolivia between the urban areas, mostly Cochabamba, La Paz, and Santa Cruz, and the more rural areas of Bolivia, such as the Monkoxi territories in the east of Bolivia, allowed me to pay attention to how specific geographies of development are constructed and the role of governance in the construction of these geographies. My primary focus for my research is this photo here is a photo of the east of Bolivia, and it's a fascinating image because it shows what Bolivian scholars call the frontier of agro-industry in the east of Bolivia. What you can tell here is that on one side of the image, we see the soy industry, which is expanding tremendously in Bolivia. And on the other side, so just we'd say holding the border or pushing on the, from the other side, what's happening is that we have the indigenous territories and their own systems of governance. So what we're seeing right here is a very contested geography that can help us explain how is it that governance is changing in this region. So that became the primary focus of my research. How is governance changing geography? This is a map of the indigenous territory where I was living, the TCO Lomerío in Santa Cruz. And I was living at the very center of this territory in San Antonio Lomerío. But I also went several times to multiple smaller communities around San Antonio. So then how could we come to understand the construction of these geographies, the social, economic, and political construction of this geography through the new systems of governance, specifically, of course, looking at the Monkoxi and their own systems? Well, I started doing interviews and talking to people there, trying to understand how they do it, how they decide, which trees to cut or not, how to go about mining, whether to accept mining at all or not. And after a long period of interviews, I decided to start writing shorter fragments in which I was analyzing how things have been changing in the last 60 to 70 years in this particular area. In my ethnography, I looked more closely at chaqueo, or the traditional agricultural practices, also known as slash and burn agriculture. And I look at deforestation, paying really close attention to the different discourses around deforestation and how different discourses of deforestation could be either including or excluding the very traditional uses of the forest by the Monkoxi. I then continue looking at other indigenous territories of the region of the east of Bolivia, such as the TCO Monteverde, to try to understand how is it that different indigenous territories are actually working together in this larger national project of changing governance and the political scenario of Bolivia. In this part of my ethnography, I also explore the role of NGOs in financing and defining the political agendas of some of these indigenous territories in Bolivia. Then, getting closer to the end of my ethnography, I talk about what I have decided to call paradoxes of governance. And by this, I mean contradictions in the very way in which these newer systems work, things that I would say I didn't expect when I was going there in the first place, and things that I believe some of the people in this area didn't expect either. And some of these paradoxes really have to do with how, for example, improving governance of the forest can sometimes lead to further commodifying the forest in the first place, and can have somehow negative effects on the way people decide to live their lives and go about their societies. So, this is a photo of the inauguration of the new presidency of Morales, the president of Bolivia, this past February, actually. And so I was there, and I was listening to the speech of Morales, and in it, there was this big idea that sort of got stuck in my mind, the idea of a new era, an era of Pachacuti, which is what Bolivians and what Morales is really calling it. And Pachacuti really means the return to an equilibrium, the going back to a different stage. And in many ways, it means the reappropriation of indigenous values and an indigenous society for the general planning of Bolivia. So, in my last chapter of my ethnography, I posed a number of questions about how the new practices of governance among indigenous communities, such as the Monkoxi, could be understood as constructing a new and a different type of modernity in Bolivia, and what are the impacts of new modernities being constructed at this moment in this country. And thank you all.